listener production.
Hey, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing and welcome to 2025. So nice to be here. And to start your year right, The Briefing team will this week be giving you all the tools you need to make this your year. And first up, we're talking investing. How should we be thinking about our money in 2025?
You can buy a tenth of a share for $20 and then you can add to that over time. So put in $20 at a time, another $20 next week, another $20 the week after. You're slowly, steadily building that investment portfolio at the same time as you're building your confidence and knowledge as well.
That chat with one of Australia's leading voices in investing is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, it is time for the headlines with Chris Spiru on Monday, January 6, 2025.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. As we know, 2025 is an Australian federal election year, and it looks like Anthony Albanese is hitting the ground running early. The Prime Minister will spend this week visiting key electorates across the country in a bid to start wooing over voters in what's being called the unofficial start of his campaign. He'll visit seats in Queensland, the Northern Territory, and WA in his first public appearances of the new year, Sash.
Yeah, so what will his message be? The PM is expected to tell Australians that this election is about a choice between building Australia's future under Labor or taking Australia backwards if the coalition is voted in. And there is still no official date for when we will head to the polls, but Albo could call the election anytime between now and May 17, but he could go early if he wants to avoid Australians voting after the budget is handed down. And that's happening on March 25 this year, Chris, because it's an election year. It's not happening in May, it's happening late in March. So he could say, you know what, guys, we're heading to the polls in February. So we will obviously bring you that as soon as we find out when we head to the polls. You'll hear it here on The Briefing. But look, these campaign stops or unofficial campaign stops are going to be happening at the same time that we'll be getting the monthly inflation figures. Now, this is the first snapshot of economic data in the lead up to the election, and cost of living is going to be a defining issue. We saw in the US and also in recent state elections in Australia that for voters, you know, the culture war stuffs around, you know, whatever the issue might be, it's not as important as we think it is. It's all about how much money are people making and are they able to spend. And so this key insight of the inflation figures could give us an idea of what the Reserve Bank is then going to do come February. February 18 is when its first decision of the year is handed down on the cash rate. And those are all going to be really important factors in how well Anthony Albanese and Labor is viewed in this election campaign.
The salaries of Australia's top public university executives have been revealed, with almost 200 people taking home $500,000 or more a year. Analysis of financial statements by 9 newspapers show Aussie unis increased their spending on key management personnel by about 7% between 2022 and 2023, dropping almost $240 million on executive salaries in 2023, up from $224 million from the year before. And generally, top execs at a university typically includes its vice-chancellor, deputy vice-chancellors, senior academic administrators, and vice presidents.
Yeah, and across the nation's 37 public universities, Victoria and New South Wales had the largest increase in overall spend. Melbourne's Monash Uni has the most key executives, with 16 of its staff on $500,000 plus pay packets, while the University of Melbourne spent the most on its executives at $13.7 million in 2023. Now, this analysis comes at an interesting time. The federal government is finalising a task force that's going to advise the country's education ministers on how to set executive salaries, and that's going to happen by June this year. It's an independent body. Education Minister Jason Clare says will focus on rigour, transparency, and more uniformity with other public sectors.
Yeah, and I mean, it is easy kind of to sledge and look at the unis and look at these big pay packets in a cost of living crisis and go, you know, point the finger and go, it's too much money. Some people who are defending these large salaries say that the task that these execs kind of undertake is a big one. They are, at the end of the day, running complex institutions the size of ASX top 10 companies. They have a lot of staffs and huge number of enrollments to kind of deal with. And they operate now with much less funding compared to overseas universities. So that's what some people have come out to defend these big salaries are saying. Interestingly, people in this space, vice chancellors in Australia, we have George Williams from Western Sydney University. He came out last year to say he asked for a pay cut when he was appointed the role, saying that they're essentially being paid too much. And just for context, a vice chancellor at public universities, they're paid more than $1 million. So he's called for a cap. That's something that he's continuing to call for at this time, and that's something that a lot of bodies are also calling for at this time, saying that we need to regain the public's trust in public universities and tertiary educators. So, yeah, we'll see what happens.
To the US now, where all 5 living presidents will come together for a rare moment of unity as Jimmy Carter is farewelled this week. The former president's 6-day state funeral is now underway, with a private service in his home state of Georgia taking place ahead of a public memorial which is happening on Thursday, Friday our time. And it is there at Washington National Cathedral that Joe Biden will lead the tributes from the country's former leaders. Donald Trump, who will be 11 days out from being sworn in as America's 47th president, has accepted an invitation to attend the service. Yeah,
that really has creeped up on us, the inauguration. I mean, it's freaky. It feels like yesterday we were talking about his victory. But in Trump fashion, he has come with complaints. He has complained on Truth Social about the fact that the flags will be flying at half-mast across the US on the day of his inauguration on January 20. Importantly, it is part of a custom of lowering flags for 30 days after the death of a current or former president. But Trump has claimed that Democrats are giddy at the prospect and that no American wants to see it happen. The White House has confirmed it has no plans to reconsider the decision and that flags will be indeed flying at half-mast on Inauguration Day.
Yeah, and look, Trump's not usually one to adhere to the norms of office. We know that when Joe Biden beat him, he didn't do the proper handover. He didn't attend his inauguration. It was all very, he's not interested necessarily in playing nice or playing politics, but he is doing that in this instance. And he had a really nice tribute for Jimmy Carter as well. But people will be watching how he interacts with his fellow former leaders. So at George Bush Sr.'s funeral in 2018, he was seen shaking hands with Obama, but did not interact with Hillary Clinton, whom he had defeated 2 years earlier in the 2016 election. So as much as, people will be like, oh, look, they're all coming together, everyone's going to be watching them like hawks, especially Trump, to see how he treats these former leaders 11 days out from him becoming president again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm most keen to see the lip-reading people, the interpreters on TikTok. I can't wait to see how they dissect this. And sushi chefs in Tokyo have forked out almost $2 million for a huge tuna the size and weight of a motorbike. And that was at a traditional New Year fish auction in the Japanese capital. The fish, weighing in at more than 275 kilos, will be divvied up and served at a number of Michelin-starred restaurants around the country, Sash.
Yeah, it sounds bonkers, but the first tuna of the year is meant to bring in good fortune in Japanese custom, and the buyers have said they hope it brings prosperity to everyone who gets to eat it. And the sale is the second highest price ever paid at the annual New Year auction at Toyosu Fish Market in Tokyo. I wanted to find out how much of a difference this particular fish was. So Japanese tuna, according to one article I could find, this was quite a hard thing to research at 4:30 in the morning, but it usually varies in price between about 96 to 400 Australian dollars per kilo. So still, it's a very expensive fish because it is endangered. But top-line bluefin, like the one that was sold, can be valued as high as 8,500 Australian dollars per kilo. So if you're eating this tuna at one of these restaurants, you're going to be paying a very pretty penny for it. But also securing one of these fish at this auction is seen as a status symbol too, because, look at this big tuna I got.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Japanese restaurant fish wars. I love it. Yeah. Welcome to 2025. That is it for the headlines. Thank you, Chris. Next up, like I said at the start, we are going to get your new year off to a really good start, and that is by bringing you all the tools you need to make this your best year ever. First off, investing. How to do it? How should we do it? Should we do it? Find out next.
Hey, Bension here. Many of us start another new year freshly hopeful and optimistic and determined to get our shit together financially. And not just do better than last year, but to lay the foundations for wealth longer term by investing. To avoid the fate of many squandered New Year's resolutions, we're bringing you a no bullshit explainer on how to get started on investing. How much money you need to do it, what kinds of investments might be solid in the new year, common mistakes, useful ways to think about it, and who to trust. Everything we discuss in this episode is general information and everyone's situation is different, so speak to a financial advisor about your circumstances before investing your money. But Scott Phillips is Chief Investment Officer at Motley Fool Australia, and he's here to help all of us. Scott, welcome back to the briefing.
Bension, thank you. Always fun to be with you, mate.
So let's say you know basically nothing about investing, but you've got a New Year's resolution. You're going to do it this time. How do you get started?
The first thing you really need to do, honestly, and this sounds almost too elementary, but it's true, is start saving, because it's kind of one of those things we say, we all want to invest. What are you going to invest? Well, some money. Where's the money going to come from? I don't know. So it really does start with just kind of either budgeting or making another way of basically making sure you spend less than you earn so you have something to invest in the first place. The best thing I can tell people is work out how much you can afford to put aside from your paycheck. And on payday, some companies' payroll will let them split their pay into 2 or multiple bank accounts. Others won't. The very, very best way to get started is to set up a separate bank account you're going to use only for your investing. No credit cards linked to it, no debit cards linked to it. Don't sign it up for Afterpay. That account only ever goes to investing, and either get your payroll to put a certain percentage of your pay into that account when they pay the rest into your regular savings account every single payday, or if they won't or you don't want to do that, put up a regular recurring transfer the day after payday. The money comes out of your savings account and into that investing account. That way you start building the resources, financial resources, you need to actually start investing.
How much money do you need to start? Like, if I've got $20 spare, can I start investing, or do I really need to wait till I've got thousands of dollars in that account you mentioned?
So the best thing about the last 4 or 5 years is that number is coming down dramatically. 20 may not be enough, but 50 absolutely is. It depends on the broker platform you use. Now, I'm talking about shares in particular. You can't buy property with $20 yet, unfortunately. So let's put that one aside. If you do want to start investing in particularly in shares or a thing called ETFs, exchange traded funds, to get started in that, $25, $50 is absolutely enough. You can now buy with some stockbrokers partial shares. Now, Commonwealth Bank shares might be $200. You can buy 0.1 of a share, a tenth of a share for $20. And then you can add to that over time. So there are so many great brokerage apps around. You sign up for them, you put $20 in there, and you can buy yourself your first partial share, or more than one, mate. Other company shares are $2, $3, $5, and $10. So you buy a couple of shares with $20 and then just keep adding to that regularly. And a really good way to get started without feeling like, if you save, $2 or $3 grand and say, oh, now I feel a bit scared, right? That's a lot of money to risk on this investment. Put in $20 at a time, another $20 next week, another $20 the week after. You're slowly, steadily building that investment portfolio at the same time as you're building your confidence and knowledge as well.
If we speak at a very top line level, I suppose there might be 3 categories of investing. You've got shares, as you mentioned, property, and superannuation, let's say. Of those, what are the pros and cons?
So super's you can have property or shares inside super. So it's not exactly a different asset class as such, but it does have different tax rules. So let's go through. I'll start with super. The best thing about superannuation is 2 really good things. The first is it's tax advantaged. You pay less tax when you put money into super, and you pay less tax on your earnings inside super while it compounds away. So every dollar you put into super is better than a dollar in any other sort of investment, dollar for the same asset, assuming you buy the same thing. And you get a much lower rate of tax when you make money inside super. So it's a really, really great platform. The second benefit to it, it's also a con, which I'll get to, is it's locked up till you retire. You're legally not allowed to touch super. So the great thing is if you're someone who maybe can't resist the urge to grab it and kind of take the money out, it is locked up until retirement. So those are the 2 big pros.
We should just mention that there are a few small exceptions to that rule. I think it's like medical things and hardship and that kind of thing. But you can't take money out to put into another investment, for example.
Or to spend, exactly, on anything. And there are those hardship provisions, by the way, are really, really quite strict. So you do have to prove to your superannuation trustee that you have those needs and you meet that threshold for partial release. Normally not even the whole super balance. It'll be a partial release for a particular purpose. By the way, we also have had in the past governments say, hey, take some money out during COVID and splash it anywhere you want. And the opposition is currently saying, yeah, maybe use it for a housing deposit. So you're right. It's not entirely and totally and forever locked up. But conceptually, you wouldn't want to invest any money in super that you wanted to have access to on your own terms. It would need to be a government legislative or regulatory change to get access to it. So that's really important.
Just very briefly, that bit about taking money out of your super and investing in a house, is that a good idea?
That's a really, really terrible idea. Here's why. Firstly, the money's got to be repaid in a super when you sell that house, and you miss out on the compounding of that money between now and then. Now, the market goes up, stock market goes about 9% a year, super gains on about 6 or 7% a year. Over 10 years, that money's probably going to go pretty close to doubling. And so you think about that, say, hang on, if I take 10 grand, 20 grand, 50 grand out to buy a house, and it could have doubled if I left it in super, when you sell a house, you've got to put that money back in, but it goes back in at the original amount you took out, not with the investment gains you've made on top of it. So you are stealing from your own retirement future. Now, the other reason why it's not, by the way, and here's the second part of it, is when people all take their money out of super to buy houses, what happens? Well, we know from Economics 101, if there's a certain amount of supply of houses, and there's all of a sudden a whole lot more demand, more people with more money, what's going to happen to the price of houses? It's going to push those prices up. So it goes from something that seems like a good idea on day one, like first home buyers grants, exactly the same thing. They seem like a good idea. I get some money, I can use it. Except the existence of those grants pushes prices up and means you have to use that mechanism just to get into the market. So it makes things worse over the medium and long term.
So just before we leave super, there's the compulsory amount that the employer has to put into superannuation from your salary. Should you be adding to that?
Yeah, if you can. The more money you add to super, the better, because you're going to have more compounding away in the background. I mean, if you're 20 today, you're probably going to live to 85 or 90. Compounding for 70 years is going to make you an absolute mozza if you can leave it alone and if it's invested sensibly over your working life and then during retirement. Because remember, super doesn't stop at 67. In theory, if you're going to live to 77, 87, 97, you're not going to take all that money out at retirement and use it all at once. You're going to leave it there to compound while you're living in retirement. So the age or the term of that investment is going to be many, 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 many decades. So yes, if you can afford to add to it, do.
Okay, let's talk about shares. What are the broad pros and cons?
All right, so shares tend to increase about 8 or 9% a year. That's a very, very, very good return. If they earn about 9% a year, you'll double your money every 8 years. So you can kind of do that for yourself in your own mind. So they tend to go up pretty well. You can start with a very small amount of money. Same can't be true for larger assets like property, for example. You can also diversify really easily. We talked about $20 at a go. With $100, you could buy shares in 5 different companies. By the time you get to $1,000, you can have 10 or 15 companies if you wanted to. So you're really diversified versus owning one single asset and having your financial future kind of swing on whether you got the right asset at the right price. It's a much broader opportunity. It's also easier to buy and sell. When you sell, particularly, you have the money in 2 days. You don't have to wait for an agent. You don't have to do the process. You have to wait until you're 67 with super. You can get that money out reasonably quickly. Now, you shouldn't be a short-term investor in anything, particularly shares. But if you do want to sell at some future point, it's what they call liquid. It's easily transferred from the asset back into cash, in this case, only in 2 days. Now, on the cons side, they're kind of a bit hard for many people to understand. It's also share prices are more volatile than property. Not even necessarily because they should be, but share prices are quoted every second between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., 5 days a week. And so every day, we saw last year shares fell almost 3% after the US Fed decided they weren't going to decrease rates this year as much as they'd previously thought. Houses can fall by that much, but you don't notice it because you don't get your house revalued every second of every day, 5 days a week, every week of the year. The other thing, by the way, companies can go broke. Very rare for a property to go to zero. I suppose if it's uninsured and burns down, it could. If then you've got the land. But with shares, you can buy shares in a company that goes broke. You can buy shares in a company that all of a sudden becomes a terrible business and the shares fall 20, 30, 40 or 50%, maybe even permanently. That volatility is going to be with you 5 days a week, every week of the year.
One major alternative to buying individual companies is, you mentioned, exchange-traded funds. What are they? Why do people use them?
So what I love about exchange traded funds, they are a way to, with a single investment, buy a very broad basket of shares. Now, there are lots of different types of ETFs these days. All it needs to be is a fund, which is just a pool of money. And exchange traded means you can buy and sell it on the ASX. There are some really terrible ETFs out there. Let me be very clear with that. But the really, really good ones are the ones that are based on a stock market index. Think about the ASX 200 or the Dow Jones. So one of those really big, broad indexes of Australian or international shares. Think about it, have BHP and Commonwealth Bank and Telstra and CSL, everything you can think of in the big end of town. It's exchange traded, so you can buy it, sell it really easily. And you get a proportional interest, which means it's in proportion to the size of the company, the chunks of it. BHP is the biggest company in Australia. It's the biggest chunk of the ETF. So you get the largest end, the big end of town, in a single investment for a really, really low management fee. And it kind of does all that diversification and stuff for you. You don't have to say which 20 or 25 or 30 shares do I buy. You can say, I'll just grab every company in the ASX 200, thank you.
Okay, finally, let's talk about property. Obviously, prices have gone through the absolute roof over the past several years. Is it too late to jump in? When should we do it? What would you say to a person in their early 30s, for example?
So is it too late? Look, if you're an owner-occupier, if you're buying for somewhere to live and you can afford to buy the place you want and you're going to like living there and it's going to mean you don't have to pay rent, you have security of tenancy, I think buying your own place, if you can afford to, is a really, really good move. Do I think you should do it as an investment? I have to say no, not right now, Benson. And it's not because I'm an anti-property, not because I'm a shares guy. If you think about the current, you said they've already gone through the roof, and you think about what would drive house prices higher from here. And there's a couple of things. Maybe wages can go up a lot. Is that going to happen? Probably not. And if they do 2 or 3% a year, is that kind of all you're going to get? Doesn't seem particularly attractive to me. People can put more and more of their wage into house repayments, but we're already at like 40 or 48%. What does it go to, 50, 52? I mean, at some point, you can't put 85% of your money, your wage into paying for the house. So there's a limit to that. Could interest rates fall? Hopefully they do this year. But how far? Probably not enough to make a huge difference. Doesn't mean house prices can't go up. But if you think, we're talking again about the compound, if you think about the long term, over 10 years, how much can house prices really be expected to go up from here? And how reliable would that expectation be if wages don't go up much, rents don't go up much, because rents can't go up more than wages either, because for the same reasons? I don't see on a probabilistic basis, I'm not making predictions here, right? But if you ask me to say how likely is it that property outperforms shares over the next 10 years, I can't work out the maths. I can't come up with a scenario which says property can keep going up at this sort of rate. If property goes up, I don't know, if it was to double in 7 years, they have to go up 10% a year, how can people afford to pay twice as much for the house in their suburb or town or city? There are benefits to owning your own home, absolutely. If you want to buy an investment property, then you can, and I don't think you'll do terribly. So I don't want to discourage anyone too significantly. The biggest benefit, by the way, is leverage. You get to put a small deposit down. Well, it's a large number, but 10 or 20% of the purchase price, and you get that leverage. You borrow the rest, and so if the prices go up, you get a kind of magnified return. That's the biggest pro, frankly, of property, is that leverage. You get to use the bank's money to help you grow your asset, and that's particularly attractive if you can cover the interest bill. And if prices do go up meaningfully, there's some value there.
I mentioned at the top that people should consider their unique financial circumstances before they do anything. How do you choose a good financial advisor? Because when I went to a financial advisor last year, it felt like going to the mechanic. Like, they could tell me anything and I don't know whether they're
Exactly.
right. I don't know. How do you choose?
Yeah. So first thing, don't do it if you don't have enough money to justify it. They will charge you thousands of dollars for a financial plan. So just be careful with that. Don't overpay for financial advice. If you don't have a complex financial circumstance, the ASIC Money Smart website is a really great free access place to start. If you are in a position where you can utilize that advice and you can justify the amount, go to someone who's only going to charge you a fee for their work. Now, that means you're going to pay a little bit more up front. What it means is they're not going to get a kickback from anybody else or anything else in the financial industry. So financial advice, pay up front, pay the fee for someone who's not going to take money from anybody else, no matter the circumstances.
Well, Scott Phillips, this has been really, really useful. Thank you so much for joining us again on The Briefing.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks, Bension.
Scott Phillips speaking with me there. He's the Chief Investment Officer at Motley Fool. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. We'd love it if you could share this app with someone you think might find it useful. And remember, this episode is the first in a special series we're running all this week on The Briefing on how to start your 2025 right. Coming up this week, how to change careers in the new year, how to consume news and stay informed while maintaining your mental health, the 5 AI tools you really should be using, and how to be hopeful in 2025. As always, there's plenty of exclusive The Briefing content for you to check out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.
Listener.